Good evening. It is Thursday, April 6, 2023 at 6 p.m. We are at the District Service Center in Cottage Grove, Minnesota. We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the land of the Minnewacan people, Dakota people. Minnewacan means dwellers of the Spirit Lake. Our first item on the agenda is 1.0, and that is our call to order. Dana, will you call the roll?
Melinda Doles. Pat Driscoll. Louise Hines. Simi Petnaik. Katie Schwartz. Eric Tessmer. Sharon Van Leer.
Here. Will you please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next is 3.0, and that's the approval of our agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Simi, seconded by Eric. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion carried. Next on our agenda is our workshop items 4.0. 4.1 is our school showcase with our elementary school principals. Hi, baby. And that is, we have with us Jennifer Holt from Red Rock, Kristine McDonald from Bailey, Susan Risius from Royal Oaks, and Rich Romano from Newport. Welcome. Go ahead, take it away, y'all.
All right. Well, good evening, school board members. We are so honored to be with you this to share about our new reading program, American Reading Company. Each of us will take a different segment, but I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So the first step for our new reading curriculum was for our teachers to learn the assessment, and ARC refers to it as the Independent Reading Levels Assessment. And it's a very prescriptive protocol that our teachers use to determine a student's independent reading level. Now, the term independent is important because that's very different than what our previous reading assessment focused on, and that focused on the instructional level. So that was a pretty big mind shift for our teachers. But I do think what it shows is ARC's philosophy of being a strengths-based approach for our students. Next slide. You'll see a staircase on this slide, if Susan can figure out how to do it. Thank you. And so the ERLA uses a leveling system with colors. And so you'll see at the bottom there, it's RTM, or read to me. And as it progresses, each step highlights a different skill that the student needs to learn. So it starts with phonics or vocabulary skills. From there, being able to accurately read words, and then comprehension. I do just want to note, I think a big piece of something that spoke to us of why we adopted ARC is that ARC is really known as being book people first. It is their philosophy and their passion to make sure that all of our students have books in their hands. And so although a student might be placed in a level, they are highly encouraged to select books that are outside of that level if it interests them. And that's really to make sure that we're instilling a love for reading within our youngest students. All right, so the whole assessment process really brings us to power goals. And I see power goals as kind of the meat and potatoes of it. A student has to identify a skill that they're going to work on right now and that they can carry with them when they do independent reading level. And so a way that I explain to parents about what a power goal is I compare it to basketball. So in basketball, you have a basketball coach. And they do, yes, Julie, I know you're a big basketball player. Others. That was not as a suck-up. They teach skills to their players, dribbling, shooting, and then from there, the players practice those independently, and that's exactly what a power goal is. It's the skill that we're teaching the student, and from there, they take that power goal and practice it when they're doing independent reading. And then finally, a huge piece is the home connection. Oftentimes parents will ask us, what can I do with my child at home to help them read? And ARC has just a great home connection tool. This is something that Bailey Elementary did at our parent-teacher conferences this winter, is every parent received an ERLA home update. And on it, it shares with the parents what the student's reading level is, the skills that the student can do, and then things that they can do at home to help support their child.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Holt. I'm the principal at Red Rock Elementary School, so thank you for inviting us to join you tonight. I get to talk about what I think is the most fun piece to our new reading curriculum, and that's the thematic units for each grade level. So earlier, Kristine talked about that beginning assessment, the ERLA, and that's really geared at getting a strong sense of where students are reading at independently. And that's really important because we know, like anything, the more students read, the better they'll get, right? And so what ARC has done beautifully is created thematic units by grade level. And then a big piece to the curriculum is they fill classrooms with lots of books around those units. And if you look at those units, those are really exciting units for kids to read and learn about. What second grader doesn't love to learn about bugs? Fourth grade right now, they're deep into their mystery unit and they're having so much fun trying to figure out the whodunit of their current book while they're also writing their own mysteries. So a lot of really fun pieces. Now you'll see the first unit is the ARC Literacy Lab, and that's the one unit that is not a thematic unit. The ARC Literacy Lab is a 6-week unit that is really designed to lay a solid foundation for literacy instruction throughout the rest of the year. During this time, teachers are really getting to know their students as readers and writers. They're assessing not only their reading level, but they also assess their engagement. And that's really critical, and that's also something that's unique and different. Students receive an engagement score based on a survey that they give students about their reading habits. And when teachers identify a student who might be a reluctant or a less engaged reader, that's one of their primary tasks during those first 6 weeks, is to help expose the student to different types of genres and texts and just keep working with them, maybe in the library, in the media center, or in the classroom library, to try to get a student hooked on books so that they'll be excited to read. So, one thing that we thought would be fun is to share with you some student products. And so I get to show you what I think is especially fun about this is we'll see that how students' writing progresses over the years. So this is a Red Rock student in the zoology unit wrote about zebras. So students in Unit 2, it's a research-based unit, and they're really learning and reading a lot about their primary topic and then writing about that. So this kindergartner tells us that all zebras are different. And then this is first grade. First grade thematic unit for Unit 2 was wild and endangered animals. And you can see already a really nice progression. And you'll notice as we look at the different pictures, the sentence structures become more complex. The depth with which they write about their ideas also becomes more rich. I should note that there are research questions that guide this process, and the research questions are scaffolded to begin from, let's basic information, what kind of bug do you have, and how do you know it's that kind of bug, to tell us about the ecosystem, all the way up to, so what might happen if this bug was not a part of the ecosystem? How might that impact that entire ecosystem? So that level of thinking that evolves through the unit is really quite impressive. And quickly we'll look at second grade here, the bugs. These students were all really, really proud to publish their bug books. They all chose their own bug, researched that, and they became the experts. On the left-hand side, we have third grade, weather and climate. They got to choose a weather phenomenon, hurricanes, tornadoes, and really research that. And then fourth grade worked on animal adaptations. And fourth grade decided to they still did all the writing that one might do to publish a book, but instead they created posters. And then lastly, look at this fifth grade. Look at that. That's just 2 pages within their book about ecosystems. And here we can see, again, that really in-depth writing about the different pieces, the text features, visual graphics that were added. And so if we think back to that very first, zebras are different, to here, I just think that's really exciting. So thank you.
We'll switch. Okay. Good evening. I'm Susan Risius, principal at Royal Oaks, and I'm going to talk to you and share a little bit about the daily framework. What does it look like for a child and for our teachers in kindergarten through 5th grade? So I know that's really fine print, but hopefully you can see it on your iPads. But kindergarten, 1st grade, this is pretty much what their reading, writing block looks like. And we really want to have the children have 120 minutes of this block. And we also have that 30-minute of intervention time, which is very important. One thing really new, I would say, for kindergarten and 1st grade is what we call the morning meeting. And this is a time where the children are interacting with their teacher. They're creating the morning meeting or the morning message together. This is not a time that we talk about what do you want for lunch or our specialist today or music. This is really a time where we're focused on our power goals like Kristine shared and really focusing in on beginning sounds, ending sounds, blends, and so on. All of those very, very important beginning reading skills. And so the teachers begin their reading block in kindergarten and 1st grade with that. Then we have interactive read-alouds. That's in all of our grade levels. It's so important, as you know, to be reading, modeling that expressive language, talking about the pictures and really modeling. This is what a good reader, so to speak, does and what it would sound like. Then we have phonological awareness and the phonemes, the phonics part. You know, it's very important. We're not throwing out phonics. I don't know if you remember, but I know my teaching, I started in 1979, and I went from phonics, only phonics, to whole language. They'll just learn how to read. And this kind of is a mixture, so to speak, but we're still very focused on that phonics, teaching children beginning sounds, ending sounds, what do words look like, how do you take them apart? Those things are very important that we focus on kindergarten and 1st grade, and then we also have some of that in 2nd grade. And let's see, how about if you go to the next one? And then this is pretty much the 2nd through 5th grade block. And all of our students have time for the read aloud. They have time for writing, as Jen explained that her children do. All of our children across the district do that. And that's one, I think, really awesome thing about American Reading Company is the writing component. You know, we always wanted our children to write, but this is so focused. So just teaching them, as Jen showed from the very beginning of kindergarten, but how important research is and that we have to verify our research. And just those tools that really, as adults, you know, how often are we using Google? We know we can't believe everything that is in Google. I think that is probably true. But we have to teach our children what does true research look like and how do we know what's true? How do we know what's false? And so that writing part is very important. The children are reading independently while our teachers are meeting in small groups or sometimes individually because we're focusing on those power goals, our standards and benchmarks for that particular grade level. Okay. I think that's the framework. Then I get to explain what our Royal Oaks 100 Books Challenge is. This happens to be a picture of our bulletin board in the hallway, and one of the things that ARC asked us to do, and many of our schools went ahead and we supported this, was really have that time for reading at home and the time for reading at school. And so we had all of our, I have little things to show, because no. Oh, yes. Why don't you? He will hold. I can do it. No, you can help me. Thank you so much. During our social emotional learning time, which we have at Royal Oaks every day, which is really called SALT, we had all of our teachers read this book. And this is just a delightful book. If you don't know it, I would highly suggest you, whether you have children or not, but no matter what age, it's really beautiful. It's just a wonderfully illustrated book. And it talks about this little girl who's in art class, and she just didn't like drawing. She didn't want to do any of that. And so the teacher said, you know, how about if you just begin with a dot? And so she then began showing dots. You can find the picture, like in the, like right in here, like in the school board area where they had keep going, where they had, where she had all of her artwork. And this entire book really shows children that no matter what your skill is, no matter what you feel you can do, you are creative in some way. It could be reading or writing or playing basketball or running, whatever it might be. And so we really wanted children to really be involved in the book. And then that really launched our book challenge. So all of the different dots there, they show that the children have read so many minutes. This is a wonderful way to have a partnership with families and the school, because they kept track of how much they read at home, how much they read at school. And then thank you, that's fine. Okay, do you want to? Then the next step, when they read a little bit more, they all received a pencil. They got to choose the color and that they wanted, and then that larger dot, our art teacher actually created the bulletin board in that larger dot. Then the children get to sign when they finish this particular goal. They get the pencil, and then they move on to this wonderful little bookmark. And this is a thrill, even though, it's just a piece of paper and they color, but it is such an awesome thing when they get to have this. And then you move up to the next goal, and then I found this in Amazon.com, it's my friend. And I found these wonderful congratulations with dots. And then we have a Skoll keychain that's the next goal that they get, and one of our parents actually donated them. And if you have any ideas for our next goal and the goal after that, I already have 2 children that have gotten that, but I don't have any prizes. But we're thinking at the book fair and some of those. But some of our children did say, well, Dr. Risius, you could just buy all of us pizzas. No money for that. How about if you give everybody a big trophy? Great idea. But it was a wonderful way just to have our whole community just really embrace reading and show the importance of it.
My name is Rich Romano, and I work for Susan.
Doesn't get paid.
Actually, I'm with Newport Elementary School, and Newport is in a different position in that we have not started the ARC reading program this year, so we're adopting it next year. So come fall, we'll be learning all of the information that my colleagues have shared with you. So in our situation, we have used a reading curriculum that we've become very comfortable with, we've become very skilled with, and now for a staff, we have to start thinking about how that's going to change. We have to in a way, drop our old tools and pick up new tools. And so we're reading the book called Who Moved My Cheese? I don't know if you've read Who Moved My Cheese. It talks about change in your life, whether it's at work, at home, so forth. And we're really just discussing, how are things changing in our world? Everything I'm very comfortable doing as an elementary teacher is now going to change. And how do I adapt to that change? So meeting with the staff, and after we've talked about it, the staff were extremely excited to jump in now, learning now. So the first thing we did is that we planned staff development trainings around the early assessment, school pace, everything that the rest of my colleagues are talking about. The Newport staff wanted to jump in full head. So we typically have PLCs twice a month. They asked to have all those PLCs opened up, and let's put ARC into all those spots, because they were eager to learn as much as they can before we broke for summer, which I was super excited to see and to feel that the staff was eager to learn. Next page, please. They also said, we want to see it. We can read something, you can look at the diagrams, but sometimes seeing it in action really helps you understand. It also removes some fear. I know when I went to see ARC in action, I was like, oh, I get it now. I read about it for a while, but I needed to see it being done. And so we went over to Crestview. All the Newport teachers went over to Crestview to see it in action. And so thank you, by the way, for Crestview for hosting us. Each grade level team came back to Newport going, oh, yeah, you can see this excitement. And whatever fears they may have had or unknowns were relieved to a degree. So it was really exciting. So I really want to thank the Crestview for hosting us. Next one, please. And a group of staff said, Rich, how can we do work over the summer? What can we do over the summer together to have some cohorts in June and July learn more and more so we can get better? I'm really proud of the Newport staff because I feel like they want to be 100% come September 1st. They're just eager. They want to master it before we even get there. And I'm just really proud of them for that desire. That's something they're asking me to help provide for them. So I'm real excited about that. Any questions for any of us?
I have a couple. I'm curious what the ERLA assessment looks like. Is it to have like a running record part? Does it like what does it look like?
Well, I'll start, and we can build on one another. So the ERLA looks a little bit different at each levels, right? And so in those younger grades, you know, we first begin with that foundational, you know, looking at word lists. And so, for example, we might have, you know, the word run, running, pre-running, right? And so the first thing to do is to go down, how are they doing with one-syllable words? And then how are they doing with multisyllabic words or words with blends? Just to kind of get a sense of where they're at. As students get older and have demonstrated mastery on those skills, that falls off per se. But that's not the only piece. There is also reading and comprehension. So in addition to doing some phonemic awareness and phonics assessments, there's also read this passage and then answer some questions about it. The questions are really two types of questions. One is text dependent. Go in, find the text in the answer there. And the other is more inferential. And so then the teachers take notes on those as well. Does anybody want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that the biggest piece too about the ERLA is it's not a one and done. I think similar to our previous assessment, it was 3 times a year. This is ongoing. So teachers are constantly updating students' progress, in some cases on a daily basis. And so that's where the school pace comes in. It's just constant. I think too, as students progress into the upper levels, it becomes not just about informational texts, but it's multiple genres. And so it's poetry, it's et cetera, which I think is so much more comprehensive than what we've been used to when we've looked at reading assessments.
That answered my other question. When I look at the units, look nonfiction based. And so I was wondering where the fiction comes in. Thank you.
Kristine, you mentioned a little bit about school pace. One of the nice things, and you can speak individually, but one of the nice things about the resource and the curriculum is that at any moment in time, we can take a look at how the district looks with literacy. Individual schools can drill down to the classroom, to the student level to see the progress. And so it's much like we used to have a data board. It might have been Post-it notes or however we organize it. Now it's all done electronically, which is a beautiful way for at the district level to monitor how we're doing. So I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to school pace and how you're utilizing that data source.
I would like to speak to that. School pace, it's something I think that some teachers just love. They love them at the very beginning, and some it's a little bit difficult to get used to it. There's a lot of parts of school pace, but when a teacher is meeting with a group of children, or it could be afterwards, the teacher really decides. Then they're putting in evidence. They're putting in, this is what the child learned. This is the power goal that they went ahead and they have mastered that. They're on to the next one. So instead of having all these Post-its and notebooks and all of those things, you know, we're really wanting teachers to be putting it right in there. That saves from year to year. We can always go back. Like Julie said, we can look at our students' growth individually as grade levels, as classrooms, as the whole school, as the district. And when we have our professional meetings, I don't think we talked about that, but we have principals' professional training once a month, usually. I think sometimes this month it's twice, I think. But usually once a month, we have all-day meetings that we are really asked, and really I think we could say challenged, because we always set goals. This is what we're going to be looking for from now until we meet. And this is the data, this is the information we're going to bring back to share with our colleagues or to share with Dr. Brookins and the ARC staff. And then our teachers also have professional development through the year. They have a coach. All of our buildings have different coaches, and their responsibility through ARC is to meet with us as like our leadership teams for reading, and then to meet with our classrooms. I'm not sure what you all have done, but I think most of us anyway have had the coach and our leadership teams go from classrooms to classrooms. We're observing. This is not an evaluation time. This is just, these are some of the great things that we saw you doing. These are some of the things we saw the children doing, giving them that positive feedback and maybe something to grow on or something to focus on the next time. So it has so many components, wonderful, positive things compared to, I think, what we've had in the past. What we had in the past was good. this is great.
So I had a couple questions. One is, does this help us identify kids who may have some challenges learning to read, like dyslexia or something like that? Does this help us identify them earlier and offer, what kind of support can we offer with this?
That's a great question. Thank you. So as Kristine mentioned, the assessment is ongoing. And then as Susan mentioned, that's all recorded in an online platform called School Pace, right? And so what's really nice is teachers develop conference schedules, equitable conference schedules, in which they determine based on where students are at and how they're progressing, how often do I meet with them, what's the focus of that meeting. What I appreciate the most about this new curriculum is it has interventions embedded within it and as a part of it. So in addition to the core curriculum, there's something called a toolkit for each level of reading. And so if I have a student, and the toolkit can be used as part of the instructional practice or as the intervention. And so if I have a student who might be struggling with blends or digraphs, the toolkit has resources for me to pull to provide direct instruction about that. And then I'm recording that into School Pace. Now, what we know about children and how they learn to read is if we have a significant documented research-based intervention and we're progress monitoring throughout that intervention and we're seeing little to no growth, that's when there's signs that there might be something more going on there, like dyslexia or some other kind of learning disability. And I think what ARC has done is it has taken the intervention process and it's done two things. One, it's systematized it much more so in our district. And the other piece that it's done is it's made that data much more transparent and accessible to the school psychologist, the special education teacher, the general education teacher, the reading specialist. And so, so we have the interventions built in within that. It really provides that skill for teachers and that transparency of data collection.
Thanks. And then is this the first year each of your schools is doing? How have the students responded to this compared to what they were doing last year?
I will tell you that what I've heard from teachers time and time again and what I've seen with students is the enthusiasm around reading has significantly increased. Like kids are really enjoying reading a lot more. I meet with my student ambassadors I'll meet with our student ambassadors, but I ask them about reading and many of them have said, oh, it's so much more fun because they're really engaged in those topics, those thematic units. What I've noticed as a building principal when I do walkthroughs is the quality of writing is really significantly grown this year, which is wonderful to see. It's especially nice to see coming off of COVID because during COVID, so much was digital and online that students did not have as many opportunities to do writing per se.
Yeah, and one thing I think this reading program comes with it, which is great to enhance that reading, is it comes with little tubs, if you will, different color depending on what the level is. But all of our classrooms have those. It comes per grade level, so every grade level got so many of those colored tubs, so to speak, with wonderful pictured books. I mean, there's fiction, nonfiction. And one thing I wanted to kind of say, if I may, as far as your question, one thing that we principals focused on at the very beginning was our children that after they took the IRLA, they were called, so to speak, read to me children. And those children, we really wanted to teach them the pattern. The dog went outside. The dog went to the park. The dog went to the dentist, or, you know, that type of a thing. And so a child would be read to me yet if they were not able to have that continuous pattern. And of course, it's important when a child is first learning to read to look at the pictures, but we also want them to look at those beginning sounds, the ending sounds, come up with patterns. And I know I feel in my many years of being a teacher and a principal that this program really fits the needs of our children. It has wonderful books. It has all these tools for assessment, progress monitoring, as Jen said. It has all the frameworks that a teacher has. It doesn't tell a teacher, like, this is what you're exactly supposed to say. Some of it is a little open-ended, but yet we want it to be that way. We don't want to have a program that say this, do this, like robots. We want to be able to have that teacher ability to say, I'm going to use this, I'm going to say it in this particular manner. So I think, for me anyway, this is the best thing that I know I've ever seen to have our children to be able to use, and teachers too.
No, I would say at this time that's too early to tell. I think what is, and we saw this with our math curriculum, it continues to cycle back. And so it'll be really great when we have an entire elementary school that has gone through this, because it just continues to build upon one another. I think that was the neatest thing, sitting with the third grade team in my building and them really being a little fearful that, ooh, are students really going to be able to do this? And then visiting with the fourth grade team and the fifth grade team, and then understanding that it might start with this piece for the research project, and then it builds on to the fourth grade, and then it builds on to fifth grade. And so it'll be interesting, but I think it's too early to tell yet on standardized.
I was wondering about kindergarten and the early years. Do they specifically isolate sounds for, vowels and letters and, okay. And so when a child is in like second grade and still doesn't know those, are there interventions along that way? And the plan after that, if they don't meet, because that's the root. I mean, if they can't do that, they're going to fail on everything else. So just want to make sure you're doing that, and when kids are starting to lag, you have the resources to intervene. Okay.
Absolutely. I just want to go back to the stair step there, right? So you can see we begin with active reading strategies and initial consonants, high frequency words, blends, digraphs. And so there's a very, very intentional scaffolding. Yellow really has 3 pieces to that. One yellow, 2 yellow, 3 yellow. And that's where they look at, are students able to, the 1 yellow is initial sounds. If I look at the word, dog, can I identify that first sound? And then we look at end sounds and so forth. So it does isolate it, and again, very, very systematic.
To address your question too, I think when the use of school pace, our district staff here, our principals, our coaches, and the people that we work with, we can look up school pace at any moment and put in, like, let's say October 6th, and put in today's date, and then it'll show, like, let's say where I look. So then I can look at it as my grade levels in those months, and the comparison. I can look at my children that are merging, my children that really right now could be at risk because they haven't moved that far, the children that are far above. So I mean, we constantly look at that data every day sometimes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep, it's all isolated. And it is very much, I mean, it is phonics as well. I mean, all of our things we need to teach the children, right? Some of our children do come into school already learning. They already know how to read. But most of our children can't, and we can't just expect that it'll magically happen. They need to have those phonics and the skills that this program really is stressing.
And as you're looking up at this picture, if you're thinking, what are those 2 manuals? The curriculum is also in Spanish, and so the orange is our Spanish. And so not every resource we have is both English and Spanish. And so our Spanish immersion students adopted, about 4 years ago, American Reading Company. So the Spanish version, yes.
Any other questions? I'm happy to see that there is some cultural identity here and on the Unit 4, 5th grade. Thank you. I think that's very important. Any other questions? Okay, seeing that, come back again. I'm coming to see all y'all. I do. Okay, Next is 4.2, and that is our long-range facility planning, and that will be presented this evening by our assistant superintendent. Oh, where is she? Oh, okay. Yeah, superintendent. Did you hear her? Okay, Kristine Schaefer. Gosh, this.
All right, good evening, everyone. So tonight we are going to review some of our long-range facility information. Some of this information you have seen before, some of it will be new. So we're going to quickly go over what you've seen, but at the end we are going to ask for your input on what you'd like to see as priorities in our new plan. So you should all have in front of you a packet with some of the important information in it. So as we are going through the information in their slides, please feel free to take notes. As again, at the end, we're going to have some conversations and we are going to ask for your input. Looks like I'm clicking my own slides over here. All right, so real quickly, our agenda. We're going to review the demographic study and the community survey and give you some highlights on that. We're going to review the long-range facility process. We're going to look at community survey results, the demographic study results. We'll look again at our projected enrollment chart. We'll check for understanding along the way and answer any questions. And at the end, we're going to share some feedback based on the survey and demographic reports. All right. So a reminder of our 2022 bond referendum. We had asked the voters for a $462.6 million bond for construction, and as you can see, what was included in that request, and as we know, that did not pass. All right, so a review on what you've seen so far. So on February 2nd, we brought the community survey to you, and you saw those results. February 16th, you did see the presentation on the demographic study. We're going to show some highlights from those again tonight. And then we set dates for all of our meetings. And as you can see, we have those 3 community meetings scheduled, one which is taking place on March 21st, and we have 2 more coming up. And again, those community meetings are for anyone in our community to come and get all this information. All right, so our process again, we have our leadership team, our steering committee, and then you can see all of the task force partners that we have so that we are including our parents, our community members, our students, and our staff. So we're hoping that we can gather input from all of those groups in those various meetings that are listed below. All right, so our community surveys. You remember we had our community survey that was conducted between December 1st and the 16th of 2022. That was a random sampling of 500 households in our district. And that random sampling was proportionate to the community members in our district. And so some takeaways from that community survey from Morris Leatherman were that while residents don't necessarily blame the school district, the property tax climate is very hostile. Those were one of the highlights that came out of the survey. There was a very low level of residents that felt informed about the referendum. The most common responses among parents that didn't vote were that they were too busy or they forgot. And 3 main reasons for opposition were the pandemic, economy, property taxes all in one, lack of a compelling need, and disagreement about the solution being offered. So those were some highlights from that community survey. And when they were asked about what they would support a property increase for, so this is the graph. As you can see, the green is what they would support. The red is what they would oppose. And so let me look back at. And so as you can see at the top, secured entrances were at the top for our community survey. And then high school classroom additions, STEM spaces, classroom additions, CTE spaces. I'm going to look at Morris Leatherman language related to our percentages. And he stated that anything under 60% may be difficult to get approved. So as you look up there, and we look at kind of the cutoff up there is performing arts space at 59%. So the things above that may be supported, things below that would be more difficult. And as you can see, the 3 bottom pieces that were highly opposed, district service center, purchasing land, and athletic facilities. And this chart again is in your packet if you want to reference back to that when we're looking at input in a little bit. All right, so when they were asked about how much they would support for a property tax increase. You can see nothing, 34%, and then between 10 and 20 are the highest percentages. And so the end result is the tax tolerance was reported to be about $10 to $15 per month on a median property value. So that is what our community members stated that they would support. Right, boundary changes. So this graph, correct me if I'm wrong, Julie, was all of the community members, so parents and and community members that don't have students in our schools, and when they were asked the question about how important is it to limit boundary changes in our district. And so as you can see, 34% vary, 42% somewhat, and then you can see those other percentages. And again, this was all of our community members, and as a reminder, 30% of community members are parents in our district, so 30%.
And Kristine, I think you have the stats. This slide shows the 500 individuals that were surveyed. So there you see 76% were somewhat or very. Remember, not many of them were parents. And I believe it was upwards of 80 when we just pulled out the parents of the 500.
Yes, 85% of parents on a different graph said limiting boundary changes is somewhat or very important.
Yeah, so if we just pulled out the parents, it was 85%, the whole 500 was 76. We don't have any breakdown of the voting piece as it relates to boundaries or not. This slide shows the 500 surveyed, and then Peter was able to pull out just the parents.
By parents, do you mean the parents, they all have children that are still in our school?
Parents of school-age children.
But not would some be parochial, or would they all just be our district?
That's a good question, but I'm assuming that they took our district.
Our district, I'm assuming, but that's a good question.
And we can certainly follow up with Peter.
Yeah. All right, so now let's look again at the demographic study. So we received feedback from community members concerned with our previous demographic study. Therefore, we commissioned a new demographic study by Hazel Reinhardt. We know that the methodology of demographers can be different, therefore results may vary. Moving forward with our long-range facility plan, we will use the new demographic information. So the demographic study completed by Hazel looks at projections for the next 5 years. The study focuses on fertility rate, cohort survival rate, and housing data. And what it showed is that fertility rate is decreasing in Minnesota and in the United States. 2020 saw the lowest birth rate in the United States since 1979. Decline in births in Washington County and in Minnesota will result in smaller kindergarten classes in the next several years. And the demographer looked at the housing growth in South Washington County schools, but said the relationship between housing and K-12 enrollment is complex, noting that it is difficult to determine how many students come out of new housing. Right, so let's look at our 5-year projections. So we know that as of today, currently over capacity, we have Eastridge High School, Woodbury High School, Pine Hill Elementary, and Gray Cloud Elementary. Today they are over capacity. At or over capacity within 5 years, we'll have Eastridge, Oltman, Pine Hill, Gray Cloud, Bailey, Liberty Ridge, and Red Rock. And again, this is with our new demographic information. And then also within 5 years, the schools that will be within 5% of capacity will be Park, Woodbury, and Lake. So those are our enrollment projections. And so since we've shown these to you at board meetings, we've had community meetings. And so this was 75 community members that came to our community meeting, in addition to our parent advisory meeting, where we invited all of our parent advisory groups to one big meeting. And we presented the information that you saw, the demographic survey information on the projected enrollments, and we asked them what they would support. And so as you can see, and this is also in your packet as well, you can see the similarities with secured entrances, high school STEM, middle school, but there are some differences below. When you look below at kitchens, cafeterias, and purchasing land. So just some differences. And This is not percentages, so if you look at the bottom, it's the number of community member responses. So at the top, it's 31 community members said secured entrance, 48. So those are not percentages, they're number of respondents. Any questions about that?
We provided this list of things to the community members.
Yes, because this is a list that was given out on the survey. Yes, yep. All right, staff feedback. So this is staff within our district. All principals presented the information at their staff meetings and staff responded. And this is these are the responses from staff. And again, these are number of staff member responses, and you can see there at the top, secured entrances, high schools, middle school additions, and then some differences down below. And this is also in your packet. All right, so now what we'd like you to do is, using the information you saw and looking at your packets, we would like to get you in small groups and have a discussion about what would you like to prioritize in our new long-range facility plan as we now start to build it, and how would you present these priorities to the community? And so we have, I'm going to put you into 4 groups. So if we can have Tyrone, Louise, Sean, and Eric just kind of move your chairs together. Kelly, Abby, Katie, and Sharon. No, we're in a different spot. Kelly, Simi, Sharon. And then Julie, Melinda, Anna, Pat, and then 3 of us. You get us, both.
And I would just add, just in conversations with board members, we're asking about the priorities and why. And so your why might be that the survey said it, our community meeting said it, our staff said it, but we may have other things that other people don't see as a high priority that perhaps as board members, you may see as a high priority. What's important is what's the why. I know that we have had conversations about early learning, about an alternative high school, around next step and pathways. And so as you think about putting together your priorities, and we'll be using this information to guide us in the next step of plan development, we just have to have a strong rationale about the why. And while Peter said it's 60 and above, he also noted somewhere along the line about communication and really talking about the why.
Were some of those things you just mentioned, because they're not included on here, not even brought forth in the survey questions, or did they just not high enough up on the list where they didn't make it to the graph?
That's a good question. I don't believe that they were part of it because they were embedded in other pieces. So, and that might be another reason to talk about the why with those.
And can I ask one more question? So the kitchen, cafeteria, restrooms section, that's like if we wanted to change the kitchen at Eastridge independent of Eastridge classroom space, or?
That's a good question. I believe that that is intended for perhaps elementary and middle school, because with an addition to the high schools, we know we'll need bigger kitchen and cafeteria. Yes, good question. And so for people watching, we'll have these small group conversations, but then at the end, each board member will speak into the mic and talk about what you put as priorities, and we'll go around. All right? We'll take about 10 minutes, and then we'll see where we're at after 10 minutes.
I banded the first three priorities together, the one that has to do with security, the high school additions, and the middle school additions, because those were the top three, not just on the community survey, but also on the staff survey. So it seems like that's exactly what the community and staff is asking for. Things I added beyond that, I added three. One of them was the kitchens, cafeteria, and restrooms. And I look at that infrastructure as something that supports instruction. So I don't know if you've not been in a classroom, but if you have a math class that we meet for 12 minutes and then kids go to lunch and then they come back, the impact that has on learning. Or if there's not enough restrooms, and the impact that has in disruption on learning is significant. Another thing I took a look at were the places where we have rentals, which would be like Next Steps, Pathways, and also Central Park. You know, I'm a believer in home ownership, certainly, as a way, one of the things I can do to control costs. So I looked at if we can bring those in-house, in the long run, that really helps control our costs for that facility space. And although it was very low on the survey, I still think land is a priority. I understand it's probably not a priority in 5 years, certainly to our community and staff. But again, if I'm looking at controlling costs and being protective of our future in the long term, I would also put that as a priority.
All right, thank you. And we would like to collect your at least your top sheet at the end, if that's okay. All right, Eric.
Yeah, thank you. My priorities are pretty simple. High school additions, middle school additions, secured entryways. I think that the community survey, staff survey bears this out pretty clearly. I think it will ring true with, I think, most members of the community, and very easy to understand, you know, why we need high school additions, why we need middle school additions, and why, you know, why the schools need to be secured. They're already secured in the elementary school. So I think that people understand that without security, without having a feeling that children are safe, and that there's not enough, you know, and that they don't have enough space to properly learn, that's an issue. And I think that people are, you know, pretty much put their money toward that. And then Louise, without knowing, convinced me also that land is important too. So I think, you know, go ahead and buy some land.
So this is going to be like the Ditto Club. I also agree with the high school additions, middle school addition, security for everyone. One of the things I added in with the high school additions was also the career and technical and STEM spaces as part of making like one big, great, you know, great, like just do the improvement properly at once. And, you know, I don't know that we necessarily, like we talked in our strategic planning about preparing our kids for this global future, and just making sure that we have the facilities in place so that our kids have access to what they need in order to be prepared. And the security, of course, is critical. And then right before you called us back, Kelly made like a offhanded mention of like some sort of like centralized learning center that could be for Next Step and Pathways, and we hadn't talked about that, but I do think that something like that is important, both from Louise's perspective of like cost containment in perpetuity, but also to ensure that we are able to provide, you know, some of our most vulnerable learners what they need in order to get the education that they're entitled to. And I agree with them on land, and but I've always liked land. And then lastly, one of the things that we talked about a little bit in here was doing some sort of elementary question that was kind of a straight up and down, like, would you rather do these renovations and expansions at elementary, or would you rather have the boundary changes that would be needed in order to address some of the overcrowding without spending money in a bond? And one of the reasons I want to see that is because, you know, we've had a couple questions where elementary has been on the ballot and it hasn't passed, but I don't know where the trade-off the voters are willing, like what the inflection point for boundaries versus increased busing that they have. And so I just would want to know where voters stand.
All right, thank you. Sharon?
Okay, mine was also the high school and middle school additions and security, and I felt that security is really critical because safety is critical. And to update our systems, our cameras, our doors, and in banks, when I used to work at the bank, we had panic buttons. And because you don't know how many seconds or minutes that you have before you're in crisis mode. So I just think it's really important. And then as Simi said, first of all, I would put out there, how many seats do we have in our elementary school that are empty? How many are full? Because then that's going to affect, if we don't do this, then your kids are going to be, the boundaries are going to change. And if you're going to Newport, you could go to I'm just using that as an example. But, and I think it's a disservice not telling them what the consequences are. I think we've been, thinking that they are going to just, okay, addition, okay, all right, we'll do that. But and the one other thing that I in some of these schools, the restrooms are outdated, or they only have one restroom, and I just think that that's unconscionable to me. So I think equity versus equality, yeah, that's a key. And then the other thing, I don't know if anybody remembers, but you remember when we had the reconfiguration of grades, where we had K through 5, and we split that out, and then, or 6, and then we had, 7 through 9, and then we moved the 9th graders up into the high school, and that could all be a possibility. So, I mean, we need to just be strategic about what the plan and lay it out. And okay, you don't want this. Here's what's going to happen if we don't do this. So make the choice. It's their choice.
All right, thanks, Sharon. Melinda?
Okay, so in looking at the community and the staff feedback, I think it's clear that, that the two top things were the huge things on both of them. So I really think that those are things we really need to prioritize since, the community and the staff are talking and that's what they want. For security entrances, I would present that as more making sure all of our schools have the double door system and the cameras, and then also go as far as adding the glass, the stronger glass, security glass as well into the door system. As far as the high school class additions, I mean, we know that we need that. They're all overcrowded. I would add on there, hopefully, doing something with our alternative learning center as well. Also high schoolers, they need the space as well. As far as the elementary, well, actually, the next thing I would prioritize would be our Next Step in Pathways program. Those students, people forget that they're still, don't even know about them. A lot of our community members don't even know anything about them. For one, they're left off of our school systems often, and they're still high schoolers. They have not gotten their diplomas yet, and they are the most vulnerable kids in our whole district. And I think that we need to prioritize them and make sure, I mean, I've had a kid in those, and the space is horrible. I mean, that Next Step program is so overcrowded, and it just keeps getting bigger every year, and there's no more space for them. They have no green space. The kitchen's horrible. There's no space for classrooms, offices. I mean, they need something there, and we need to do that as soon as we can. And I would love to see something that's safer, to have Pathways and Next Step together, and possibly even something like they talked about where ALC was also there. And we could do something with transportation with that too, because both ALC and the Pathways program have work programs often. They go off to work, so that's something we could help out with there. And a lot of our ALC students don't have driver's license. So that's something we could look at as well if we do some type of building where we put those programs together. And then as far as looking at the elementary classroom additions, if you look at the community feedback, it has 0. So as much as I really don't want to do boundary changes, I think that what I'd like to see is us utilize the space that we have. I think you said we have about 920 space open or something about that?
How many elementary seats do we have open, but.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I did the quick 16 schools and like how many I thought, so. But
Yeah.
what was it, 1,305 spaces open?
Okay, so, I mean, I would like to see as little boundary changes as possible and really be able to present what that boundary changes would look like to our community down the road when we get more into this. But I also think that the community has spoken that they don't want to increase their taxes that much for boundary, for elementaries to be added onto. So I think we need to try to utilize those spaces as much as we can.
All right, thank you. Pat?
Oh, Katie's last.
So the one thing that I care about, all of these top things that the community said, I totally agree with. I agree with the land because if we wait, it won't be there. It might not be there, and we'll be having our bus garage or whatever we build not in our district. So where are we going to put it? So, we won't lose money on it. Land goes up in value. So I think that's a smart move to invest in. And I think we need, because of the staff survey, being an elementary principal and many years in education, I know what I needed for space, and I've seen spaces where the speech teacher's in an old closet. I've seen that happen in buildings, and when you're overcrowded, that's the kind of thing that happens. It's very, I was in a classroom that didn't have a full, it was a roof that came like this. You couldn't stand up in it, and I was teaching special needs students in that. That was in 1976 or 7, something. But anyway, I'm hoping that won't happen in any of our buildings, and I really want to listen to staff in this regard because they live in those buildings, they teach in those buildings, they know what they need, and I don't believe they're exaggerating. I think that, teachers are honest, and they're just saying, they would be, if they could make it work, they would make it work. And the other thing is, if you're a person whose child lives in one community and you have to have that child go because you just moved here and your child can't go to the neighborhood school and you have to bus them to another city, I just don't think that's right. I don't think people will buy the homes. I think if you don't have the space for them in the school, they're not going to buy the homes. And so that's a property issue for all people who own homes. If you don't have space in your school, your value, you may not be able to sell your home when you need to. So I think we need to listen to the teachers and do that as well. But I also think that let the voters decide. Do 2 questions. The first question is on all the things that we know the public wants and will support. And the second question would be about the elementary additions. And if they want to go that way, that's, it's their property values that will be affected. It's, there are kids that will be going to different places for school. So let them decide that. That's all.
Okay, so I have the secured entrances with the security, as well as high school additions, including the STEM and those classrooms. I would like to look at middle schools and see what we have for open space before we add on. Just look and see what do we have for space, because I feel like high school additions are very important and the secured space is very important. And as we start to get higher in price, that's where we start to know that maybe it won't pass and we need these to pass. So I would like to see the secured entrances and the high school additions as like one question. I think we do need the elementary bathrooms, especially in like those older prototype buildings. I went to Pullman and it had one set of bathrooms. My kids went to Pullman and it still has one set of bathrooms. So we need to do better there. And then I did also have a Pathways Next Step, Alternative High School, and Early Learning Center all in one would be like kind of what I would like to see, if there's a space that we already have that we can put them all together, utilize maybe something that we have already. But I do feel that they all need kind of a home, and they would work well together. I mean, the special ed kids right now, they've set up classrooms over the summer for elementary kids. They help clean classrooms. They do those types of things. Alternative learning kids could help with, teaching preschools. They do it in some of the high schools right now. So I think they could all utilize each other if they were all in one space together. I'm a little indifferent about the land. I think if we do it, it has to be its very own question. It has to be a third question. We can't combine it with anything else because I don't know that in the tax tolerance that it's something. I agree we need it because if we don't buy it, it's not going to be there. But again, we've seen what happens if we put everything that we need or want on one. So I think we need to be very strategic in how we word the questions, how we place the questions. And I don't really agree with the adding on to the elementary schools knowing that we have the space. My only issue is we don't have buses, we don't have bus drivers, and it will be extensive boundary changes. It isn't going to be minor boundary changes, we know that. And I don't think we can say we don't want additions, but we want minor boundary changes. They're not a thing. It's either additions or major boundary changes at the elementary level. So, I mean, if that's what we'd rather have as a third question, but I think if we're going to do that and look at any of these things, the middle school boundaries changing or elementary boundary schools changing, before that question, before that vote, we have to show the boundary changes that will happen, because that was a big thing that people were asking. You're telling us if this doesn't pass, there's boundary changes. What do they look like? And we didn't have them. And I think we need to have those what those boundaries will look like if these things don't pass, including the high school. I mean, what will happen? So that's what I'd like. So it depends on what we want. So if we go with the secured, I think the secured entrances and the high schools should be together. I think then we should have some sort of question that looks at elementary boundaries and possibly the pathways next step, or we can combine the pathways next step with the high schools. So my third question would be either a land or it would be the additions to the elementary schools.
As I listen to board members share, and our leadership team has had conversations, and what really becomes hard is we use the word priorities. And even as you go around the space and you hear that we're kind of adding on to our priorities. And then when we get to the price tag portion and costing it out, it's going to be way above. And so I think this is a really good first start around priorities, but we're going to have to prioritize the priorities if we want to stay between that $10 and $12. And that's really hard, especially, and we've had this conversation as a leadership team, because these are things we need. These are things we've asked for before, but we're going to have to really look critical at prioritizing the priorities. I also want to say that when we look at the community feedback here, we have really worked and will continue to work on using the terminology, engage with us. When individuals come to community meetings, it's not to sit and listen to us. It is to give us feedback. And so you can see how we're utilizing that information and bringing that back to the board. And I think from the leadership team's perspective, we want to give our community every opportunity to say yes or to say no. And I think as you shared tonight, we need to make sure as a leadership team that we're prepared in the event of boundary changes or any other shifts, that we can clearly spell out and lay out what that plan is, if it's a yes vote or if it's a no vote. And I think we will be prepared to do that.
All right, thank you everyone for your input. And again, if you could pass over your top sheets so we can gather your input, we greatly appreciate that. And so finally at the end, just a reminder, we do have 2 more community meetings, April 25th at Oldman Middle School, May 23rd at East Ridge High School, where all community members are welcome to join us and get information. And then our next steps. So we are going to review information again with the staffing committee about what they'd like to prioritize. And following this meeting, the steering committee will begin drafting a preliminary plan with all of the feedback that we have so far, and hopes that in May we will have a final plan to share with you. But we will update you along the way. Well, it is April, so May is next month. And again, our website for anyone watching, where we have all of this information if you'd like any more information on the community survey or demographic information.
Thank you. For a minute, I thought Carrie wasn't going to be here. I thought, does she know she's presenting this guiding change document? And she whispered, she was like, I knew you could do it, Julie. But thankfully, she's here. And, you know, Carrie, maybe before we get started, this is an individual who gets up early on snowy days and is talking to me as I'm driving and we're evaluating. But really to Carrie Olson, our director, and the entire transportation team, it's been a year, is what I'll say. Each Wednesday, we get the updates on bus drivers and where we're at. And so in addition to talking about where we go next with transportation, what our next plan is, this work in terms of routing is all being done while everyone is doing their full-time day job. And so in between, they're talking about plans and options. At our last steering committee meeting, we've been meeting regularly. We've had conversations about, of course, transportation. Everybody around the table is familiar with the transportation opt-in. Remember, that purpose is to say who needs a ride and who doesn't so that we can be more efficient with routing. As we met last week, yeah, it was last week. I was thinking it was this week. As we met last week and we began to talk about more pieces of transportation, I was beginning to feel a little uneasy because there are some significant changes that we're talking about. And so we want the board to be part of that process in approving a guiding change document. Tonight, Carrie's going to go through it. Carrie, I don't know that you have to spend a lot of time on the current reality. That is what exists. But I would like you to share, as a result, when we finish our work, this is where we want to be. And the center column, as I spoke with you today, not all of those unacceptable means can stay. Because if they stay, we won't get to the result of 15 to 20 bus drivers reduced. So, Carrie, I'm going to have you talk us through this. Carrie and her team have run different scenarios, and she'll be able to share that with you. As a reminder for the board and community, currently high schoolers, 2 miles, middle school 1.5, and elementary students a mile. So a mile or less are walkers. Anything outside of that mile are bus students. So just as a reminder of the mileage. So Carrie, thank you.
Thank you, Julie. And I just wanted to remind everybody when I was looking back at the board minutes, Dan Fine actually went over the majority of that.
Carrie, I'm just going to interrupt you. We just got notice that they can't hear. Is your mic on? We want to make sure everyone can hear you.
There you go. Thank you. All right, sorry about that. So unacceptable, I'll start out again where I left off. Unacceptable to increase walking distances for elementary school students, as well as unacceptable to increase walking distances for middle school students. Unacceptable to change school start times. Unacceptable to not provide transportation for current choice programs in grades K through 8. Results very quickly, we want to implement a radius model for fall of 2023 coming up to determine transportation distances. This requires a change to existing district policy with the 707 transportation policy. And the reason we do want to change to radius regardless of what we do or do not do is right now we have, it's a very loose system. I mean, as you folks probably know, it's in front of someone's residence to the point of drop-off with the school. Parents a lot of times say, Google tells me this, I drive it, it's this. We take district vans out, a lot of time and expense and resources used throughout the school year to, I don't want to say disprove or prove that what we actually are doing for the mileage is accurate and correct. So with a system that's certified, any software system that we currently have or that we would buy in the future, that's a pretty easy thing to do. You pinpoint it, like Julie was saying before, 2-mile radius, mile and a half, mile, whatever that is. It's much less arbitrary. So regardless, we would like to make that change. Another result is implement a plan that would reduce the need for 15 to 20 bus routes, increase the accuracy of ridership, and that would be done through the student tracking piece that we've talked about or will be talking about. Clearly define what a hazard is. We also have an extraordinary hazard committee that meets when those are determined, and I'll be honest, until this year, I think in the 16 years I've been here, it was reviewed one time. That was probably about 10 or 12 years ago. Before that, those hazards have existed forever in some places, and I'll get to why we want to change some of those or look at modifying some of them because of the changes in the district over the past 15, 20 years. We would also want to review the hazards, determine if there is rationale for keeping or removing a currently existing hazard, which I just referred to, and finally create a transportation system that is sustainable for the next 5 years. That is a big goal right now. So to dig into this a little bit, first of all, any questions before I get into this? All right, we initially ran back in January on some options. It started literally with what would we do, what would next fall look like right now if we did everything the same, all right, and we can't sustain it. We are literally about 15 drivers short right now. We have currently 12 open routes that have no drivers assigned every day. So either office staff, a few substitute drivers are filling it. We have one morning and one afternoon contracted out, general ed route, and right now that's all the contractor will commit to, and that is a week-to-week basis. If they don't cover it, that would probably honestly be another additional morning and afternoon route that would be in fact canceled. So we're very fortunate in that regard right now. And then we took scenarios, and we very quickly realized that we started fooling around as much as we could with walking distances, the non-busing areas is what we prefer to call them right now. And very quickly determined we would not gain much of anything unless we do a combination of both moving those non-busing areas, looking at, moving either middle school, elementary, middle school out further, and or something with some of the current hazardous areas, modifying some of those, eliminating them, whatever that looks like. And I'd like to at least focus on 3 options that we ran, and part of it was in conjunction with Dan and Julie as we were talking things through. And these were run in the latter part of January through the last 2 weeks, all right? And by the way, I should preface this also. Last year for high school, for our public schools, not the non-publics, we focused a little bit on those. We did, Sean, thankfully, communications this year. We've got the opt-in. We did, in fact, do opt-out for this school year, all right? And we got pretty good response out of 2 of the 3 of our high schools and some of the non-publics. But what we don't know with the opt-in, those numbers coming in soon, we don't know. Are some of those kids the same high school kids that are currently not riding that actually opted out with us last year? So those are some of the unknowns that we're looking at as we go through these different scenarios. But I'm just going to throw a number at it because it's all the different scenarios we've ran. Option 6. One option we looked at is changing the measuring criteria to a 2-mile radius for all schools to establish non-transported areas and eliminate all the current hazardous areas. So everyone would go to 2 miles, and we'd eliminate all of our current hazardous areas, much like one of the other, Stillwater did this mid-year last year. In that routing simulation, and again, keep in mind that's with this year's school students. We don't have a way to progress them up the grade levels, so we're assuming it's fairly, accurate. We would eliminate about 40 routes. That was the worst case scenario. We wanted to start with the worst case scenario. We don't think we need to eliminate 40 routes. So then we said, okay, what can we do next? And again, this is all provided we're moving to a radius. And then we decided to change the elementary to 1.5, and we left middle school at 1.5 and high school at 2.0. So we just changed the elementary. In that, we were able to eliminate, sorry, bear with me while I get to my other page here, 29 routes, and with that, we had some inefficiencies. So what happens is typically we route 3 tiers, usually middle school, high school, or elementary, and another late elementary. And with that, we had a lot of single-tier routes, either in the first tier. So again, what happens is we can run the route, but we're paying a driver, first of all, for literally 20 to 30 minutes worth of work, and then we don't have anything else on the back side of that. So that was very inefficient. And then the final scenario we just got done running was we moved the elementary to 1.5 and changed all of secondary to 2, so moved middle school to 2.0. That eliminated 8 routes for us. Again, some inefficiencies in especially the second tier gaps. So we have a first school, literally an hour in probably 12 different routes in the middle that no one's doing anything, drivers sitting idle for the hour, and then the third tier. So some inefficiency with those different scenarios. So that's where we are right now today. Looking for guidance on, you know, like I said, the unacceptable means at one point, or I guess really are right now today, it's unacceptable to increase those walking distances for middle and elementary, but that's kind of where we're at. We are not going to get to saving the number of routes we need unless we do a combination of those distances as well as hazardous. And sorry, Julie,
You go ahead.
You've got a question.
Nope, you go
One
ahead.
other thing on the hazardous, we did take the liberty in this last scenario of moving some of those hazards. Our hazardous committee has met, but some of them are very simple. Some are not so simple. We have someone, I think Katie or someone over here mentioned the tunnel, right, for Woodbury. That was created specifically, honestly, for Eastridge and has never been utilized. So that we figured, okay, that has changed. We now have a controlled intersection at Lake and Bailey as well for those kids that are north of Bailey for Eastridge High School. These are just examples. Another easy example is if you're at Pioneer and Lake heading towards Radio, there used to not be a path on the north side of that. So we're busing kids almost we were busing kids up until the school year on the corner of Radio and Lake to Lake Middle School. So it's simple things that we think that are not really true safety hazards anymore, paths that didn't exist that now exist. Oltman Middle School across 65th, you know, they've got the crosswalk that kids are utilizing around Oltman Middle School. That area right now is deemed busing. That route right now is currently canceled north in the Summit Hills neighborhood, but that's deemed busing. And again, now there's paths on both sides. So those are the types of hazards I'm talking about, low-hanging fruit that we're trying to look at and go, this maybe makes sense versus just, you know, do we need an all-out committee to say, oh my gosh, you know, it's not a 55-mile-an-hour road that we're talking about. So just.
And I think
sorry,
even
Julie.
with that, we know because there was transportation, just by making changes that we may consider, like it's not hazardous, something changed, we know that it will impact families.
Correct.
I want to get into that center column so that we can have the discussion, because what we did is we put a lot of considerations in there, and we know they can't all stay. And so I think as a board, what we need to have a conversation is just where are board members at with walking distance. You got to hear a little bit about kind of the outcome, but what we want to know is where are you at when it comes to your tolerance around distance?
Well, isn't that a law?
2 miles. 2 miles is the law, and right now it's 1, 1.5, and 2.
Okay, so, whoops.
Yep.
Okay,
Quick.
so for me, the only unacceptable means I think should stay right now are the first 2.
Okay.
I think when we talk, especially after hearing inefficiencies, I mean, would changing start times eliminate those inefficiencies? So that's kind of where I am on that. I do have one question, though, about, and the only reason I even think about this is because my cousin went to a private school and they got money instead of a bus.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when we talk about driver shortages, is that something that would cost too much to eliminate the busing to the privates and just,
We legally cannot do that.
I thought we could pay instead of offering the bus.
Well, you have to have like, it's almost got to be a joint agreement, to the best of my knowledge. Back in the day, we used to actually, Hill Murray, we bused those students. We had our transfer point at
Yep.
Woodbury Elementary, way back in the day. So it's kind of got to be a mutual decision.
Okay.
One way or another, we have to transport those kids. It's just, you're right. Are we going to do it with our buses or a mutual decision with them and meet them at the border, the closest, safest spot at the border to transport the non-publics that are outside of our district? Those that are within our district, we do in fact have to legally transport them, equal transportation.
Okay, okay. Yeah, because like I said, I just knew because my cousin, they were paid because they didn't get a bus.
Right.
So I didn't know if that was something. But yeah, I think because don't we also legally have to special education students?
Correct.
Yeah, so those top two, I think are the two that we basically legally have to do. And then outside of that, I think we need to look at every option, because even in the one that you mentioned as one of our best options, we're only eliminating 8 and we need to eliminate 15 to 20. So I don't like when there's a lot of unacceptable means. I think we need to put as few as possible and then let them
I think
see what
we
can
have
do.
reason to believe that the opt-in will allow us to be more efficient too. And I know Sean has done this in another district, a smaller district. And Sean, I don't remember what the savings was. Okay. We cut 30 rounds. Mm-hmm. And if that happens for us, woohoo! I don't know if Carrie's like, Julie, no, it's not going to be that much.
Good, yeah.
But I think that for the board and the community to know that that's our first step, is that we're going with tighten up efficiencies before we move to mileage and hazards. But Katie, thank you. That's helpful.
Do we
in
know?
terms of unacceptable means?
I was going to say, do we know for the students who are within walking distance now, what percentage of them get driven versus walk? Because I'm just thinking about like what traffic potentially would look like at this. Like, I have picked up in our schools, and I don't enjoy it, and so I'm just thinking about what that might look like if we do increase distances.
Timmy, I'm smiling because you could go to any parking lot in the district at the end of the day. I was over at Pine Hill, 2 weeks ago, and it was at least 20 minutes of car flow.
Yeah.
And it was organized and it was efficient. But Red Rock, you name the school,
Liberty
and the parking
Ridge.
lots are filled. So
Yep.
if there's a data source in terms of even walkers, and we can also tell, because a lot of times kids will ride their bikes, and as it gets warmer, of course, we'll see more bikes in the bike racks. But if you don't see bikes, walking's the last option. Biking or scootering would be an option before that, so we would see those out.
And then when we do increase things like walking distances, I mean, are there like traffic concerns or like hypothermia concerns or whatever that we should be keeping in mind as we look at that?
The only thing I would say with that is, no, I mean, we believe that getting kids to school, whatever means that is a shared responsibility. So if children are walking or, weather is cold or whatever, we hope that parents or there's walking groups or an older sibling or whomever, that shared responsibility is split between families and our district. They are our regular bus drivers. They're actually built in within our 3-tier system. So currently, we started off the school year with 8 in-district special education morning and 8 special education afternoon routes in district, okay? And we've got 60, 70 other routes that are contracted out. What we did was ask all of our special ed drivers if they would be willing to switch to general ed routes, and then because at that point in time, our contractor could have taken them, since that's not a possibility. They don't have the staff either. 2 of our drivers switched from special to general, so our contractor took those 2. So now we have 6 in-house morning and afternoon for SPED this year.
I was wondering if we could have any more of our ones that are driving special ed buses do general ed, and then I don't know if we any type of private like van type transportations, and then could use like get some type of TPR reimbursement as far as those for those level 4 kids.
Sure. So what happened also is our drivers are contractually, they bid on the routes in the fall. So that's why we voluntarily asked them to move from those 8, to the general ed, special ed to general ed. Again, I had 2 volunteers. The other 6 chose to just continue driving special education. That's the right to do so. We currently have, oh boy, probably 10 different providers, both type 3, which are our vans for special education kids, and the yellow school buses, which right now Hastings Bus Company is providing those for us. So they pick up everything else that we don't do in-house.
And we do TPR. We do TPR. Okay.
Yep.
Is there any way to utilize city busing? Is that feasible at all?
Not to the best of my knowledge. I don't think, Pat,
No
that we even
routes?
have many lines out here to do that.
So is there a way to make our buses kind of follow a route that kids have to walk to, make less stops?
We have had conversation about that. It is not a model that we have moved to yet, depending, I think, on what happens with some of this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think what happens, whether we're talking about our contracted busing or our own busing, it doesn't change the number of drivers because even our contracted companies aren't getting bus drivers. So we're just doing kind of a swap. But I think in the long term, we're not really solving the problem because we still have a set number of bus drivers.
On top of it, that will be retiring shortly as well.
Yeah, we looked at one of the things our subcommittee did, our steering committee.
Aging up is a good majority, so yeah.
Yeah, and we looked at the workforce, and that is very concerning for us too in the future.
Yes, it is.
Carrie, how do we look as far as the buses and their capacities? Are they, does that make sense, or I don't even
Absolutely.
know. It's not a full question, but.
No, it does, Eric. And I would say the middle school are pretty full. Most elementaries are very full. Some of the non-publics where we have room, a couple of them are full, a couple are not. One of our high schools I know is very low on loads. The difficult piece we have is, I think Julie mentioned before, those load counts, when we do it on a daily basis, okay? We pick a couple of days during the year to do load counts. If all those kids are riding that day, great. If not, it doesn't give us a good sense. If we hopefully will move to a ridership tracking at some point, that'll tell us exactly how many kids, be able to look at that data really quick and make adjustments where we can. We did start out with 100 morning and 100 afternoon routes for the school year. In the last 3 to 4 weeks, we've pared those down based on some numbers again. We're down to 97 and 98. So we were able to reduce routes looking at that. It takes a lot of time inefficient because we're literally hand going through those things. But I would say the elementaries, the majority are full, the middle schools are full, some of the high school routes.
So overall efficiency is not an issue?
It's really not. In some areas, yes, it'll clean it up somewhat. And we'll be able to reduce runs across the board doing that. The question is, do those 3 runs happen to be in a tier that makes sense and can fit together? Can you get from one school to another to another? So that's the difficult piece.
That's what I was going to ask as far as with the high schoolers. Once we find out, with the opt-in and we start with that, combining more routes where students would just have to be at the bus stop earlier at different stops where we're combining, something that might be one route into, 2, 3 routes.
And we are constantly doing that, literally making changes. If there's stops we see, and some drivers are really good about coming in and saying, these kids haven't ridden all year. Great, we take those stops off. Or I'm overloaded, this bus can pick them up. We'll move stops around different routes to be able to accommodate those things. And the morning isn't the problem usually, because we can, in fact, move those pickup times earlier, and schools are really good about saying, if I'm supposed to drop at 7:30, hey, you guys bring the kids here at 7:20. But it's the afternoon on those dismissal times when you have to be there on those set times, that's where we run into the trouble.
So when we talk about the, like, scanning their cards to know, when we talk about like those really cold days, I mean, couldn't we, on a really cold day, if we know that a bus is running at 50%, couldn't we add stops that are on the way for kids when it's really cold? I mean, if we're talking about increasing, say, an elementary school to 1.5 miles, and if we know it's going to be cold and we know there's only 50 kids on that bus, and we know there's like maybe 20 kids that, I mean, couldn't we, when we know these things?
No, and the reason is, number one, safety issues, but number two, we have to legally have a roster of kids on that bus, all right? If, God forbid, something
But that's what I'm
happens,
saying, have them as kids for, say, if it gets to a certain temperature, this stop then is made, and these kids can ride on that day. So it would be something that's set up in advance, because otherwise, how would you know?
A separate roster of kids.
A separate roster of kids.
We could potentially
when we
look at
talk about cold
doing
days,
something like that.
because we talked about, I know one year when it was really cold, we were talking about shuttles, and we were trying to run shuttles for some of those areas because
The dilemma I see would be, okay, equity versus equality. Do we only do it, well, we would only be able to do it for those buses or those select runs that actually have room to be able to do that. So.
I just worry about
Not
little
impossible.
kids walking when it gets really cold. But
But
I
I
mean,
think many districts have adopted, and they don't call them walk zones anymore. It's the zone where parents are responsible and the
Non-busing.
zone where the school district is responsible. And we've really always owned that as, you know, the safe routes to school. This is the pathway students can take. But we're kind of at a point where it's that shared responsibility of, if you're within there and it is that cold day, then we're going to ask for parent support in helping us.
can we change what we call it? I mean, can we change it from bus to, I don't know.
Parent responsibility?
Parent responsibility,
We've talked
or-
about that, and we've actually interchangeably, I think.
We've used
used-
non-busing areas or
Yep.
non-busing zones versus walking areas, and, you know, and again, we have been trying to really publicize shared responsibility in
Yep.
transporting and getting kids to school.
Any other feedback? Because we are going to go back to our leadership committee, and we want to get this finalized and then start talking about what options. So any other feedback?
Yes.
One thing I was thinking about, and I don't know if this would be something that the parents would just do on their own, or if it's something that could be done through the schools, is having some type of online type of rideshare type system
Like
where
a carpool?
parents can, like a carpool type system where parents can put in their names and, you know, where it comes out where they're taking turns with those kids, elementary
Sounds
kids
like
that
a
are the
liability
walkers.
waiting to happen
Well,
if
Yeah, and I
somebody
think
gets
part
in
of
an
it-
accident. No, I'm saying if we even
Yeah.
put it as a
Yeah.
district.
And I think in a lot of
Fairpoint, that it
neighborhoods.
would, yeah, that it would, then if a parent gets in an accident, well, I signed up on the district
Right,
website and my
right.
kid was in a.
But
or
also,
if
I think in a
it's-
lot of
yeah.
neighborhoods that are right, like, my house used to be walking to Lake, and I know a lot of my neighbors had like informal carpools, like, I pick up on Tuesday afternoon these 4 kids, right? And so, I mean, I think in those types of neighborhoods, parents are already,
Okay.
right, like, if they're not, you know, just a couple blocks away, they're already setting up kind of some of these informal ride sharing already.
I was thinking more like through the PTAs that are doing that, not like through the school.
Yeah, but I think that also might be a liability for the PTO as well.
And there's just one other thing I wanted to add. So this is, the timing is really good, but we are somewhat pressed for time for next school year. We've got the opt-in information, which we'll have very soon and be able to really tear that apart very quickly here. Non-public information we'll have back in the next week or two. And then our contractor, though, has also indicated to us whatever general education routes that we need help, they want to do for us, or we need help with next fall, we have to have that final number to them by May 15th of this year. So then whatever we do give to them by May 15th, they will commit to. After that point, if we would change our mind, needing more or whatever, they'll see what they can do. So I hate to put pressure on, but it helps us in the feedback that we're getting because, again, it's, yeah, fall for us is right around the corner. I mean, we start routing usually, you know, right in June.
Do we pay?
Pardon me?
So if we say we need routes, and we only need
If
5,
if
we still have to
commit
pay
to
for
it,
10.
That's
Okay.
correct. We would be
I just
committing to
wanna-
that.
And what we've
Figured.
told our own bus drivers, if that is the case, we can utilize our contractors and we will utilize our own bus drivers to help support other drivers and where there are needs. So we feel like we can still do that. I think the question is we have a busy spring. We have strategic planning, we have long-range facilities, and as I've talked with our leadership group, I don't know if we want to address the mileage and the significant changes as we go into fall, or is that an implementation for fall of '24? And we work toward, because May 1st is coming up, you said May 1st, May 15th. Do we work with our contractors to see if we can get 15 contracted buses on our regular ed? That will buy us some time, because what we don't want to do is get into June and now surprise our community by saying, and by the way, we're going to change your transportation and now you're going to have to bus your children. And so I want to make sure that we're looking far enough ahead. I think the components like the Radius model, we can do communication with that and implement that. We know that, and Carrie would know exactly how many families are impacted by the Radius. The opting in, of course, that's already in motion, but I worry a little bit about the timing of the mileage, and that really is the direction that Carrie's going to need to know. So I just, from the board, when you look at some of the changes that we may be undergoing, just any quick thoughts on fall of '24? Do we work quickly and try to do it now? Because this would have to be approved by the board in the next month.
I'd be okay with the 1.5 for elementary starting this year if we can get it, and then leave
You shift middle school to 2?
Nope, leave middle
So
school at
elementary,
1.5.
so K-8, 1.5, and then 9, 12.
Just, and then see what it does, only because we can't cancel routes again. I mean, we cannot cancel.
And I think in the
It's
spirit
just-
of not canceling routes and assuring transportation in fall is why, and I know it's more expensive, but to take a look at contracting, we said 15 to 20, I think originally, but even if we contracted 15 on the low end, we would keep all of our bus drivers. I mean, in the last 2 weeks, we've had 2 retirement and a medical leave.
Correct.
I mean, these things just come out like this, and now we have to cancel routes. And so I don't know if we can make it all happen in that timeline without upsetting parents, because we want to bring them along.
What about if we, I mean, we could look at the possible 1.5 miles, but what about if we take a look at those things that are the obvious not hazards anymore
Yep.
and get rid of those by the May 15th date?
And we could, Carrie knows those less hazardous or areas that have changed. We could come back to the board and share that information and talk about the number of students impacted with that, talk about the radius impact, and then even bring back if we made the adjustment to 1.5 for elementary, we could look at that too. Louise, you were going to say something though.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of increasing the elementary. I'd rather see the middle school increase, just because of the shorter legs and how long it takes to walk that. You know, I'm sorry, it's dark, and it's da-da-da-da, and et cetera, et cetera. I also, in terms of timing, a little concerned about changing the mileage and then potentially changing boundaries right after that. I don't like those two on top of each other either.
I agree with that, and I think it's a really good idea to start with those swipe cards. Just don't do anything yet. Do a year of the swipe cards, and then you'll have better information to make those changes.
Well, couldn't we survey not survey, but get consensus from the parents, a commitment that this is my route, my child will ride, and make, and if they don't, if you miss 3 without a,
But
then
that
you're
gets
done.
hard though.
That's
like,
what opt-in is.
That's what
So
opt-in is.
opt-in is
I know,
just
but I
that.
wanted
But
to.
also
And-
it gets hard because like say you're on a sports team, right, at the high school, and so for 6 weeks or however long sports season is, you don't take the bus after school, but
And you
then you have like 4 weeks until the next season starts up, or you don't play another sport, and so you're still.
Then your parents would be responsible for taking you then.
Yeah, but-
for the whole year.
Yeah, and so I don't think that I don't think that that's a good idea. I mean, I think that if we want kids to participate in our activities, they shouldn't have to participate in like an entire school year's worth of activities just to get,
Well, I don't want that to be.
or not participate at all just to be sure
Yeah,
that
but
they
I don't
get
want that to be
transportation.
at the expense of the elementary, I mean, walking 1.5. Have you driven one? I got in my car and drove 1.5 to see where it was and 2 miles. No, I'm not gonna walk 2 miles. What you
I
talking
know
about?
exactly how far.
Know that.
I said nothing about walking distance. I know how far 1.5
But I
miles
think
is, but
we're all saying walking distances here, like walking
non-
distance, non-busing areas,
So,
non-busing
Carrie,
areas.
I had a question. In terms of the cost of contracting, how much is the cost of contracting compared to doing that same cost in-house? Right, so if we have like X route done by a contractor versus X route done by one of our SoWashCo drivers, what is the cost differential there?
Right now, it's at least double, and we are going into contract negotiations with them. So it will at least be double.
So at least double.
Plus.
And then my other question was that if we do have contracted routes, do we have flexibility with them? So I know with our current drivers, because of the contract that the labor contract that we have with them, they bid on their route, and then any change has to be at their initiation or their volunteerism. With the contracted routes, do we get to say, okay, we don't need you here anymore, we want you there? No, so
No,
it's the same thing.
it would be the same thing, locked into those particular routes that we would give them.
Okay.
But the great thing is we still have transportation office staff, mechanics, who are still all on backup for driving a bus, right, Carrie?
And all of you are probably eligible to come get a license. We can train you very quickly, so.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Is there
Okay,
like,
Carrie, I'll drive for you.
Is there like
Come on.
a solution that is like preferred from a transportation perspective or easier management-wise from a transportation perspective?
I would say it's not preferred, Simi, but right now what we're seeing and we've run probably 6 different options since late November, and I don't think we can get to the number that we need to get to and going forward with an aging workforce unless we just do a combination of those non-busing areas, moving them somehow, some of them, as well as modifying some of those hazardous areas. I just.
Yeah, I would like Melinda, I would like to see how much you get from changing some of those hazards, right? Like I mean, I used to live at Pioneer and Lake, and so I know exactly when the sidewalks started, right?
Right.
And I didn't realize that we bused still up that way. And so I think that would be helpful because that's probably like the lowest hanging fruit, right? And then, yeah, I'm not really opposed to any of the other, like I agree with Katie and Melinda that we have to restrict you as little as possible in finding a solution. But I also agree, was it you who said the boundaries shifting? Yeah, I think I do agree that like if we're gonna shift boundaries, we're gonna have to do busing anyway, so let's just do that all at once, right? And we'll find out in November or whenever what happens, right? But I would rather not rush into it if we don't have to.
And I think the only we don't have to is that we heard about the costs, and so we know that we would be incurring an additional cost to do the contracted, but that would assure us on the results side that students would have transportation every day. And every Wednesday, Carrie wouldn't be emailing communications to prep the letters that go out to families about no transportation. Katie?
I would be curious to see, because the only reason I was suggesting changing the elementary is I feel like a lot of those parents, are driving their kids. So I'd be curious to see with the opt-in, opt-out, how many are in that we might, if we would change from the 1 to 1.5, is it really going to impact a lot of families, or did a lot of those families already opt out of transportation?
And
I guess is
the only thing I could say to that, Katie, is the majority of our elementary runs are full right now. So that tells me that I don't know how those parents will answer. Hopefully they're opting out as the ones that are already driving, but those buses are full. So.
And we put more kids on those than, because we do like 3 to a seat if we can,
correct.
right? Instead of 2 for.
It's probably 65 kids for elementary are on each bus, 65 students.
And middle school and high school,
about
do we say
52.
2?
We try to stay at about 52 kids, correct.
So we try to do 2 to a seat for those. I'd be curious if parents, that'll be interesting to see. But I'm on board with not changing it. And looking at the hazards, and I do though, because if we do change boundaries, the boundary change would probably be a 24 thing, and then we'd be changing the buses. So we would be changing them all at one
It would
time.
be, yes.
Right, but if we're trying to eliminate doing it all at once, if we wait until 24, we would be.
Oh, no, I think you
it
just,
all at
I think you just do it at once because this is when the changes happen. Like, because if you're gonna, okay, I'm gonna change you now and then you're gonna get reboundaried, I mean, you just do it at once and then, because then you don't know what your new bus route is gonna be anyway, right? We're always, whenever there's a boundary shift, there's always bus route changes.
I just don't want to cancel routes. I mean,
No,
I
Neither do we.
And I really, though, I also don't want to, when we're getting that fund balance up, I don't want to pay double for something that if we made a shift like this, we wouldn't have to pay double. The public is always saying we need to be fiscally responsible. So that's where I'm looking at, if we're paying double for a route and we could change a walking distance by half a mile and not pay double for a route, it's kind of that line. Do we be fiscally responsible and change the route, or do we pay double for the bus?
I think one thing to think about is, let's just say through opt-in, if we saved 5 routes, and through hazards, we saved 1 or 2, that's 7 routes. So we would be saving money there, and we would need to invest it in the contracting side. It's not equal, but I think we would still have to, Katie, I agree with you, we would still have to look at where could we come up with some other efficiencies. Because you're right, and that has been an ongoing problem of moving forward with some of the financial things that in the long term aren't fiscally responsible, but we also know that we're impacting a lot of students when we're talking about elementary changes with distance, and so I think it's weighing that and what the impact is.
So Carrie, could we feasibly have the hazards figured out and then the cards for the students starting for the next school year, and then waiting to see what happens with boundaries before we change any type of routes?
So unfortunately, no. The cards are tied to this routing software, which we are currently looking at right now. We need to either upgrade TransFinder that we currently have, or move to either Edgelog or Traversa, which is the VersaTrans system. And even if we would stay with what we had right now and upgrade, which we need to do in order to implement a system like that, which there is also a cost associated, we're out at least 8 to 10 months with any 3 of those vendors, even if we'd upgrade with the one we currently have. So for next school year, not possible right now. Maybe mid-year through the school year, depending on what we look at, but it is not possible for the start in the fall, unfortunately. That's the student tracking piece.
How about a system where the bus driver just, I don't know if they have any type of way where they know which kids are on and which kids aren't, where they kind of track that?
We really don't.
Or is that just impossible?
Really don't. But that's what I'm talking about, the student, that tracking, that ridership piece is at least 8 to 10 months out.
So really what we'd have is hazards, we'd have the radius, and we'd have the opting in. And then, Katie, you asked for 1.5 elementary. We can bring that information back. So what would it be if we just changed elementary? I think just to give the board some idea, but the 3.
Or change middle to 2.
Okay.
Well,
Gary's thinking
ladies,
this takes time, Julie.
It takes time.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes a couple weeks to do each of those. So we will do our best.
So I want to go back to the guiding change document because that will provide the guardrails, and I want to make sure that as Carrie and the team continue to work, that what we heard the board share was that in the unacceptable means, the only 2 things that as a board you would find unacceptable would be bullet point number 1 and bullet point number 2, that you will allow administration to explore the options as it relates to non-busing areas. Start times, I know someone had a question about start times. If we extended start and end times, it would be like having a 4-tier system. Some kids would be coming to school at 9:30 or 10 o'clock, and they would be staying until 5. But, that is also a route saver too, right? Because we would need fewer buses. And then the other one is that we would take off unacceptable to not provide transportation for current choice programs. So the only 2 that would remain on would be the first 2. Board members okay with that?
Yes.
All right. we will move forward with that, and we will continue some of the other work that we discussed tonight.
Can I ask one more question? I apologize.
No, please
These are
do.
good ideas. You guys are going to figure this out, I can tell. As far as the radius, or the non-busing zones go, do they have to move in half-mile increments?
They do not.
Okay.
No.
Does that help? If we go 1 point, go 1.2? I mean, or does that not make much of a difference?
It wouldn't matter to us. I mean, either way, we would set that parameter in the system.
Okay.
So.
But Eric, I think it's a good point, because we talk about that even with staffing, that it's always a 0.5 or a 1.0, and what about a 1.75? What about a 1.25? So Carrie, if you could run 1.25, 1.35,
Sure.
1.45. No, but thank you. I think that's something to think about as a committee moves
Great
forward.
point. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you, Carrie. Ooh, that was a lively one. All righty. How long y'all been on this? Okay. Moving along, we have 5.0 information items, and the first one on our agenda is the reading of proposed policy changes presented by Julie Nielsen.
Thank you. I'll make this quick. We are bringing forth 8 policies tonight. The policy committee, review committee met and went through them. You will see policy 403 in your packets. There are grammatical changes and clarifications of substandard performance. That is letter B on policy 403. On policy 404, there were just updates in the area of legal references. In policy 421, gifts to employees and school board members, there were no suggested changes. Policy 505, distribution of non-school sponsored materials on school premises by students. And you will see that what was added, and employees. And we talked about that during our time together. Kelly shared that she was going to go back and check. And so we did not have a policy, so we'd like to include and employees, and that is also part of MSBA's policy. Policy 512, school-sponsored student publication and activities. No suggested changes there. 519, interviews by students, interview of students by outside agencies. We just did some updates with MSBA's language. 525, violence prevention. You will see there are some changes in letter A, section 2, and letter E, section 3. And then finally, 530, immunization requirements. That was just re-looked at not too long ago, so there are no suggested changes for that policy. And so I would ask if board members have any questions about those policies, or board review group if anything was missed.
Any questions? Okay. We had a sign up for public comment on policies only. Dana, has anyone signed up? Thank you. All right. Next is 6.0, and that's reports and comments, and we'll start with our superintendent, Julie Nielsen.
I just have 2 updates. First of all, I signed a proclamation for this week. It is the Week of the Young Child, April 2nd through April 8th. And so just to share a little bit about the proclamation of the young child. The first 5 years of a child's life are the period of the most rapid brain development and lay the foundation for all future learning. Children's cognitive, physical, social, emotional, and language and literacy development are built on a foundation of children's positive interactions with adults, peers, and their environment. High-quality early learning programs provide important benefits to children, families, and our communities. High-quality early learning programs lead to positive outcomes for individual children, helping them be better prepared for school and more likely to succeed in life. Families provide children's first and most important learning environments, and parents are children's first and most significant teachers. And finally, high-quality early childhood education depends on high-quality early childhood educators who ensure that children, supported by families, have the early experiences they need for a strong foundation. I was excited to present this to Bob to present back to his staff, and we certainly want to acknowledge all of our early learning staff as we do the proclamation of the Week of the Young Child. And finally, just talking a little bit about safety. In light of the tragedy in Tennessee, it is always our reminder, and while safety is on our mind every day, I shared with our learning leaders the expectation, which there are expectations in place around all safety drills, but the need to make sure that our staff goes back and takes a look at our lockdown procedures. And I think for board members and our community members to know that anytime we do a practice drill, it's not a rubric, it's not a march to this space, it's not a go here, it's a think. And so what we ask our leaders to do is to think through the many transitions that occur in a day. What if your class was in the hallway going to the bathroom? What if in our high school there was a pep fest going on? What happens during lunchtime? And so it was not even physically about going through the act of locking students behind doors, but rather thinking about what would I do if we were in this situation? How would I direct the students? Because ultimately it is our staff's job to make sure that students are led to safety and behind doors. So really the focus was on thinking through what to do. You are going to notice, and you may hear from families in our school district, that there's a new process being implemented. When parents or visitors to the school come to drop off things, the towel for swimming, the tennis shoes for gym class, the lunch that they forgot, what we're going to ask is they buzz in, they share what they're dropping off, but we're not going to have everybody that has things to drop off in the morning coming even into the main office. We're just going to have a space in the vestibule where people can drop, and our office support staff will make sure it gets delivered. One less person into our schools. Greeting visitors. So we will still allow visitors, obviously parents and family members in for IEP meetings. That will continue. However, at our greeting desks and our office coordinator areas where we're welcoming people, we need to make sure that anybody who's being buzzed into those spaces, that we know their name, we know the location and what grade level their child is, and the reason for their visit. So we are really being intentional around the standard protocol of asking questions. Hi, I see that you have a district badge. Can you please let me know your name and why you're here? We have to get to the point where we are asking. Now, we know that many of our individuals in our school offices know people, and you really get to recognize people, but we need to have a standard system of buzzing people in particular, those learning spaces that aren't secured at a two-tiered level. So just for board members and community members listening, safety is on our minds every day, and we will continue to emphasize and make sure that we hold staff and our leaders accountable for making sure that we are implementing those safety practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Next are our school board members' committee reports, and we'll begin with Melinda.
Okay, so I will report on 9/16. I had a building tour there on March 22nd, and the sites that I saw on that date were Pancalo, Bel Air, and the auditory oral program at Stillwater Early Childhood Family Center. And they're just such unique and amazing programs, and I just would encourage all board members, whenever there's, those building tours, to be able to go on those to really see what our intermediate school district is doing with the kids that we refer there. And then also, let's see, I had a meeting last night there, and I presented a few different preliminary goals. I'm on the goal committee we're developing a new board self-evaluation there. And then also the 9/16 is still seeing about a 3% increase in enrollment per year, but staffing remains to be an issue. And there are more vacancies this year than last year. And the waiting lists, which we know, there's still plenty of waiting lists there, but it's not due to space at all, it's due to staffing. I mean, they actually have a lot of open space in their schools, but just they don't have the staff to have more kids there, so.
Okay, thank you. Pat? Louise?
I had three of my committees met: the Advisory Staff Development Committee, the Citizens Financial Advisory Committee, CFAC, and the Ambassador Committee. All three of those committees, the main part of the agenda was an opportunity to give feedback on the strategic plan the mission, the vision, the core values, and direction. The ambassadors also took a look at the transportation update and what's going on with opt-in. The calendar overview was something that Staff Development Committee did, and then CFAC also took a look, as they do every month, at the enrollment update and budget revisions. Also took a look at a legislative update.
Thank you, Louise. Simi?
Yep. My committee update will sound very similar to Louise's since we overlap on 2/3 of our committees. And then the third, I just was on the policy committee. I believe that was the shortest policy committee meeting we have had in like 4 years. It was amazing.
Hey. Katie? Eric?
Yes, ma'am. I'm going to hurry up with this. Sat in on the AMSD March board meeting, board of directors meeting. They had a state senator there and a legislator there. Didn't write down the names. Right now, there's a bill working through the legislature to increase 5% funding for education plus indexing for inflation. There was concern amongst the board members that with more funding comes more mandates, which is almost a certainty, and that those funds would be eaten up by those mandates. So the legislators that were there kind of assured them that would probably happen. Yeah. The goal is to get back to 2003 funding levels, but they've kind of assured us that it's going to take more than one budget cycle. So some of the other goals, just briefly, cross subsidies for special education, English language learners, increasing student counselor ratios, working on funding more pre-K programs in more districts, and then finally just increasing the requirements for graduating high school, including such things as personal finance, civics, and ethnic studies. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Sharon? Pass. All righty. 7.0, our future meeting dates. Our next meeting will be our business meeting on April 20th, 2023, then a workshop meeting on May 4th. Those meetings will both be held at the District Service Center at 6 p.m. There will also be a strategic planning meeting for the board on Thursday, April 27th from 5 to 8 p.m. And now we are at 8.0 and we are adjourned.